Hey everyone, Pastor Rob here, and as Centerpoint's resident history buff and fanatic, it has fallen to me to describe the cultural outline and the context where we find the book of Ephesians. It's so important for us as we're diving into the writings of the Bible that we understand the people that it was being written to. So we're going to talk about a bunch of different topics. We're going to look at Ephesus, the city, in a geographical context. We're going to look at it culturally, economically, and finally, we'll look at it in a spiritual context as well, and why the city of Ephesus was so pivotal in the spread of the gospel being expedient throughout the region of Asia because of the work that Paul did over the 3 years that he spent in that city. So first, let's look at the city of Ephesus geographically. Where does it sit? I'm sure many of us probably couldn't find it on a map to save our lives if somebody pulled up a modern world map. But Ephesus was located in Asia Minor, what is now modern-day Turkey. And it's a coastal city. It sits right on the coast of the Aegean Sea, directly across from Greece. It's one of the closest places that the Greeks went to when they Hellenized the ancient world, and they began spreading Greek culture and Greek society around. Ephesus was considered to be the crown jewel of all of these Hellenized Greek cities in the land of Asia. It was called the Mother City of Asia, actually, and it had 250,000 people. Now, that doesn't sound a lot to us now, but you got to think not even 200 years before that, Rome became the very first city to have over 1 million people in it. So this is a time in the world where 250,000 people inside of a city is unimaginable and unfathomable to the ancient world. There were so many people that were there. And with its location being a coastal city right there at the Aegean Sea, it was considered a gateway to the eastern part of the Roman Empire. So Rome sits farther west than Greece does, and you've got to pass all the way through Greece, you have to pass all the way across the Aegean Sea and this hub to the rest of the Mediterranean world that was Romanized at that time. It was a hub, and it was a place of lots of cross-travel between the eastern side of the Roman Empire and the western side. And so you have a lot of different cultures that are meshing together. You have a lot of different languages that are present, and especially in the city of Ephesus, Greek was pretty much the main language that was spoken there. It was very much a hotbed and a melting pot of different cultures and people groups as well. So next, let's look at the city of Ephesus from a cultural context. As I said before, this is a place where lots of people are traveling to and from throughout the Roman Empire. It's also a hub for trade. It's also a place where there's a lot of economic prosperity, a lot of business to be had. We'll talk about that more in just a minute. But you see all of this, all the people that are there. It's a very much a atmosphere and a culture that is high class and prestigious. So high class and so prestigious and so well thought of that it drew people from all across the Roman world, especially somebody like Apollos, who we meet in Acts chapter 18, who is from Alexandria, all the way from Egypt, crossed all the way across the Mediterranean Sea to specifically go to Ephesus in order to preach the gospel in the synagogues. He was a Jewish believer from Alexandria, from Egypt, but according to Acts chapter 18, all he really knew was the baptism of John. But he was so learned in the scriptures, he was able to preach boldly and charismatically until Priscilla and Aquila, they pull him aside as Paul is traveling to Jerusalem, and they explain a little bit more adequately who Jesus is and more about what they called at that time the way. Now, when we look at the city of Ephesus from an economical context, it was a very rich and prosperous city. It was the center of all trade in Asia Minor. It was the center of all road travel that went through that area. It was a hub for sea lanes, not only trade and travel via land, but it was the hub for sea travel and sea trade as well. And so you're getting all of the trade that's coming from all of the major cities across the Mediterranean as they're traveling on their way towards the Roman Empire and to and from. So you're receiving all of the prosperity that comes with that vast and rich source of trade. So rich, in fact, that Ephesus was able to build incredible wonders. We see a theater that is built there that houses 25,000 people, that sits 25,000. To put that into context, even in the ancient world, You think about the big house at U of M that seats over 100,000 people. This is doing a quarter of that at a time where there are so much fewer people around, that you have a tenth of the population of this city could have fit inside of this theater. And a lot of that city did in Acts chapter 19 when there was a huge riot that was thrown, but I'll leave that for somebody else to discuss further. But with the riches that they were able to accrue through these trade, Ephesus was able to build even one of the wonders of the ancient world, which of course was the Temple of Artemis, which was described by Herodotus as one of the greatest things to see to all of the Greek travelers who are looking around to visit these wonders of the ancient world, alongside of with the Great Pyramids of Egypt, the Lighthouse of Alexandria, Hanging Gardens of Babylon. I'm not going to name all of them because I think that only interests me. But you have the Temple of Artemis, which plays a huge role spiritually in the city of Ephesus. Now, finally, let's look at the spiritual context in the city of Ephesus at the time that Paul is writing his letter to the Ephesians. When we look at that context, we see that all of society and all of life in the city of Ephesus revolves around the cult of Artemis and the worship to that false god. Now, who is Artemis? Artemis was a Greek god of the hunt, also a Greek god that was associated with many things, associated with the moon because of her twin brother Apollos, who was associated with the sun and associated with light, also associated with archery as the goddess of the hunt, but also curiously was associated as a goddess who was associated with childbirth, because of the Greek myth that Artemis was the twin who was born first and then assisted with the delivery of her twin brother Apollo. So she becomes a goddess of protection over childbirth as well. This translates and morphs a little bit in Ephesus to Artemis being referred to as a goddess of fertility in general. The cult of Artemis was so prevalent and so powerful, such a stronghold inside of the city of Ephesus, that the banking system was run from the Temple of Artemis. It was the vast, powerful, money-changing entity within the city, that you even have the banking operations taking place at an economic level at this place of worship. And so we see even from the worship of Artemis, that is also known as Diana, because the Romans come in and they adopt these Greek gods and give them new names, which from a historical perspective is one that you want your new conquered citizens to be assimilated into your society and you let them worship their old gods. But also from a Roman's perspective of, we better hedge our bets that these gods might be powerful or might have some sort of power, so we're going to adopt them and co-opt them into our own pantheon, increasing our own strength and our own power spiritually. However, you see that the worship of Artemis is prevalent in the city, and it's tied so closely to the economy of Ephesus that it causes a big problem when Paul comes in and is preaching the good news about Jesus. That you even see people like Demetrius the silversmith, who was one of the prosperous craftsmen within the city. It becomes so much of a problem that in Acts chapter 19, he gathers other local craftsmen in the area and says, hey, listen, something needs to be done, because this guy Paul is spreading a new message to our God, and he was worried that the worship of Artemis and the temple of Artemis would be discredited and would no longer become alluring or lucrative, frankly, if we can say that. And so a riot breaks out where Paul is forced to flee a riot and a mob inside of the theater in Ephesus, even though he wanted to address the crowd, which people convinced him otherwise. But you see the drastic contrast between Artemis and the person of Jesus, where Artemis is associated with light, with creative arts, things like music and dancing, joyful things, and also is associated with childbirth and the protection of children. On the other side, we see Jesus, who is described as the light of the world, and not just the founder of creative arts, but the inspirator and the creator of all things. And then we also see him as somebody who adopts us through his relationship and what he's done in his life and his work on the cross and his resurrection. We find adoption and our childhood protection as children of God through our relationship with him. Where Artemis was unable to have the power to do these things, Jesus came and performed miraculous works in the city of Ephesus through the Apostle Paul, and was able to transform the layout of that region. Even so much to the point that the Bible says that all the Jews and all the Greeks in Asia Minor were able to hear the news about Jesus. And this was only possible because Ephesus was such a hub of transportation. And at that key point in the Roman Empire, that key place of travel where news was able to spread so quickly, Paul was able to spread the word about Jesus rapidly through the region of Asia Minor. And it was because of that rapid movement that that region was radically transformed.